Public Safety Special Called Meeting. This is the sixth meeting, special call meeting, held over the past 5 months to discuss the proposed use of license plate readers in the public right-of-way in Nashville and Davidson County. In addition, council members have held their own community engagement meetings over that time to discuss how LPRs may impact public safety and privacy. It is worth noting that while we as a council are considering legislation to expand the use of LPRs in metro government in the public right-of-way, currently license plate readers are allowed in Nashville for use on private property, and some neighborhood groups are currently using them to prevent and mitigate crime in their area. In previous meetings, council members have opined and given commentary about their position on license plate readers. That is not the intent of this meeting. The intent of today's meeting is to discuss the details of each LPR bill and amendments and allow council members to ask questions related to the bill. So please refrain from giving statements and a commentary about your position on LPRs, and use this opportunity to ask questions and get clarifications on the various bills and amendments. There are at least 2 bills and 7 or so amendments for each bill. And in the interest of time, each sponsor will have 10 minutes to discuss and answer questions regarding their bill before moving on to the next bill sponsor. And Chair Nash and I will facilitate the question and answer discussion. In addition, before we get started with the Q&A discussion, we will hear from Dr. Daniel Balasubramanian with Vanderbilt University about the preliminary results of a community survey he conducted here in Nashville on attitudes about LPRs. We discussed at previous LPR meetings that a survey would be conducted. So we'll hear some of the preliminary results of that. And then we'll hear from Mr. Tom Sharp with Metro Public Health about their interest in using LPR technology for emissions testing. And we'll also hear from MMPD Deputy Chief Dwayne Green, who will give us a brief update on the proposed use of LPRs in patrol cars. So with that, I will turn it over to Chair Nash to open the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman Gamble. I want to thank you for kind of hosting this and bringing it together, bringing Dr. B back to us, and we get to hear from Tom Sharp. I know people had questions about the LPR use for exhaust or emissions testing. Likewise, my intent with this meeting originally was to, at the end of it, have a final vote on it from the Public Works Committee, but I failed to kind of make that clear to staff what I'd wanted here, so we will not be doing that. But I have been told by Council Cooper that we can limit the discussion at the next Public Works meeting. My fear is that we get in committee, we get too wrapped up in LPRs. We won't get our business done. This is one of those topics that has raised a lot of interest. So there will be limited debate, very little debate at committee meetings. And frankly, I certainly after the last meeting, I think most people have kind of staked out their positions on this and know where they want to go. So we shouldn't need too much debate. Save it for the open meeting. Just kind of fair warning up front. And I turn it back over to Chair Lady Gamble.
Thank you, Chair Nash. And with that, we will start with Dr. Daniel. And I'm not sure, you may have a slide or two, so if we can give him access to share, that would be great.
Yes, if I could get access to share, I'll present these slides. Okay. Share. Okay, it says I'm sharing my screen. Try to hide this and present. Okay. And I know I have limited time, so I'm gonna go through this quickly. I'm happy to take questions offline or now. So my role and position to reiterate, research scientist at Vanderbilt University. We have an NSF project that investigates a similar but different area. So what we did is an exploratory survey on ALPR. We gathered community input on Nashville's city and police use of LPR, the proposed use. We advertised this via neighborhood email lists, local next door groups, neighborhood associations, sent to a local reporter, and we sent it to the city council who distributed it as well. We want to obtain as many responses as we can, and it's still up and running. A quick note, there are related surveys on ALPRs. The most closely related to ours is called Community Support for License Plate Recognition. It's from 9 years ago. It's by the same authors as one that's also been sent out by the council. Thing to note, their survey question wording is below, and I'll distribute these slides. It's very similar to ours. The phrasings are similar to ours. The distribution number of samples is different. I'll point that out later. They did a random sampling via the postal service via mail. Just point out a few threats to validity. So things to note. So we intentionally collected no personally identifiable information. So that means no name, no email, no phone, no address. And that means the same person could have potentially taken the survey multiple times. We have no reason to think this is happening or has happened. Just want to point it out. The number of responses we received so far is 167. It's still going, and we'd love to get more. Survey cited above had 457 responses, so roughly 3x more. But still, useful insights can be found in these results. I'll present them. I'll just hop into it. Question 1, police cars should be allowed to carry ALPR cameras. So the thing to note here, the blue lines indicate the raw responses, and then the percentages are over here at the top. So the agree and strongly agree combined for about 64% of that. The strongly disagree and disagree accounts for about 27%. Okay, so we move on, we say police should be allowed to place ALPR cameras in fixed locations. The strongly agree and agree goes down just a little bit to 59%, and the strongly disagree and disagree goes up a little bit to about 33%. Okay. Police should have access to ALPR data for finding stolen automobiles. Strong support here, strongly agree and agree, roughly 73%. Strongly disagree and disagree is roughly 23%. Okay. Police should have access to ALPR data for automobiles suspected of being used to commit a serious crime. So I see strong support there. Again, about 23% strongly disagree or disagree. And you see less support when the question changes to the police should be able to access ALPR data for automobiles suspected of being used to commit any crime, like traffic violations. So it jumps down to about 47% for agree, strongly agree, and up to about 39% for disagree and strongly disagree. This is in line with previous findings that say higher impact crimes, serious violations, people support it, and support wanes when it's retained longer and when it's used for lesser crimes and we're not sure what it's for. Make and model of the car. So about 65%, 64% for agree, strongly agree, 26% for disagree, strongly disagree. Faces of occupants in the car. So you see support waning a little bit. So about 50% for agree for faces, 41% disagree or strongly disagree. Okay, so this is telling. This is perhaps the most telling slide, possibly. So the city should be allowed to use ALPR to monitor parking violations in city parking lots. This is the only question where a majority of people strongly disagreed or disagreed. So over 50% disagreed with this. In fact, the strongly agree or agree was only at about 30% for this question to monitor parking violations in city parking lots. So people seem to be in agreement on that. And there's less support for using ALPR for urban planning purposes, a seemingly benign purpose, such as determining the number of cars that drive down a road each day. So the agree is and strongly agree is about 50%. The strongly disagree and disagree is about 33%. It's one might intuitively think people would support a benign use case like that. Again, people seem to agree that the ALPR data should be shared with the FBI. So somewhere around high 50%. Disagree is in the mid 25s. But ICE, you can see, there's much less support for that. So 48% of people strongly disagree that the data should be shared with ICE. And around 40% agree or strongly agree. So this is in line with the debates we've seen. I think it kind of echoes the views we've heard. I'm concerned that the police use of Alpr would invade my personal privacy. So if you look at the agree and strongly agree here, that's around 41% who agree that they think it would invade their privacy, and around 44% do not think so, and 14% are neutral. So it's kind of balanced on that one. So people do have privacy concerns. Some demographics, crime is a big problem in my neighborhood. The majority of people did not strongly agree with that or agree. So it's about 30% of people who said agree or strongly agree that crime is a big problem. So these are just some demographics. How long should police be allowed to keep the data? So 3 months. So if you look at the percentages, that's what's to point out here. So 3 months was 30%. 33% said three months or so. 18% said it shouldn't exist in the first place, and 20% said if the data doesn't match a hot list, it should be discarded. Okay, so this has been debated as part of many bills. And we've got the place of residence, so urban, suburban, or rural. So suburban 60%, urban 32%, rural 6.7%. An age breakdown. So it's a pretty even age breakdown, apart from the outliers at the end, the 18 to 24 and the 75 or older. So a pretty healthy mix of 25 to 74 for this data. Male, female, so it's 50% male, 40% female, and there's 7.5% that prefer not to answer. And that's the end of that. You can reach me at this email address, or I'm happy to take questions now or often. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Daniel. Do we have any questions about the survey? We'll share the slides. We asked him to stick to our 5-minute time frame, so he kind of went through that very quickly. But we'll take a couple of questions before we go to the next presenter. And I see in order Councilman Rosenberg, then Evans, then Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How do you account for self-selection bias with this survey?
Yeah, so this survey was open to anybody. Like we said, it was exploratory. When you compare our survey to the one that I cited, which is by the same authors as one that you cited as being unbiased, there's a note in there that they say people of minorities were a small percentage of this. So it may be that you have a population that's more predisposed to support the police.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know, based on the 167 is too small, obviously, of a sample size. So what number of participants would you really need to have in order for it to be really, I guess, significant information for all of us?
So I'll refer back to this study that I cited from 2012. This is from Fairfax County, Virginia. They sent out 2,000 surveys. They got 457 respondents. And I didn't include the demographic breakdown here, but our demographic breakdown for minorities is actually greater and more representative than theirs is. So we have fewer samples, but the demographic breakdown in terms of race is a little bit better. As to how many samples we need to make this conclusive for Nashville, that's difficult to say. It needs more time. And this was an exploratory survey. Like I said, one of the threats to validity I called out was we collected no personally identifiable information. So even in a random sample survey distributed via mail, like this one that's been reported in a well-known journal, there's a possibility that the person in the household filling it out is biased. So you have no idea who, even if you mail it out with a personally unique identifier to each person, you don't know who in your household's filling it out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. My questions were similar to Councilman Rosenberg's and Council Lady Evans, just around bias and statistical relevance. But my question also comes around the information, and I apologize. I remember this survey being sent to us. I feel like I clicked through, but to what extent are the people taking the survey informed, or how are they informed? I mean, I guess, you know, we see something that is sort of counterintuitive around, or maybe intuitive around, kind of use for parking enforcement. I mean, people don't like to get parking tickets. People don't like to get speeding tickets. But we also know that, you know, LPR, not in the context of this legislation, is, you know, an unbiased, you know, if equitably dispersed in whatever way to do, you know, speeding enforcement or parking enforcement and so forth. So, you know, I think that's what we always struggle with as policymakers, you know, the using the data and kind of figuring out, and, you know, people who are taking a survey, do they have sort of all the nuance in the context? So can you share what information people taking the survey receive? Thank you.
Yeah, I could pull it up in a few minutes. It'd take me a minute to get to it. But there was just a brief explanation of what ALPR does at the top of the survey. So there's always two sides to it. It's not like a focus group where you can have a discussion and then you tell them something and they ask a question. So we presented a couple sentences of here's what ALPR does. We presented, we said this information can be used to match against a hot list or solve crimes after the fact and things like that. We didn't present any other sides of it, any privacy related issues, partly because that's more for a focus group, what you do, where people can interact and ask questions. With regards to the parking and traffic, I think there's a well-studied notion of different types of privacy, and that type of privacy gives people a sense that they're having their autonomy violated. I mean, that's well studied. It's we could go into a much longer conversation about that, but yeah, it's people don't like to feel that they're being watched like that, and that their autonomy is being violated. But what I'm showing on the screen right now is the wording of the survey that's most closely related to ours from 9 years ago. And you can see if you click on the survey, our link is still up. You can see exactly what we advertised. That was all that was distributed. And it's very similarly, surprisingly, we did not look at the way they worded their survey before we did ours. And ours is worded very similarly to this.
Any other questions, Councilmember Henderson? All right, thank you. Councilman O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess to that end, I think from a methodological perspective here, you know, while it is a survey and not just like a single issue thing, the methodology here is similar to, say, a local television snap poll on one of their websites, right? I mean, this should really be discounted as a meaningful point of public input. I get it. I mean, we're looking for data points, but I guess I would just caution colleagues that this is not something like the Vanderbilt poll, that you know, this is not the kind of thing that has a rigorous methodological underpinning. It is some members of the community's attitudes, but without even an opportunity to know that people were anonymously participating on a single basis, or even that they were in Nashville at all. You know, this is tough data to wrestle with from the perspective of using to inform a policy discussion. So I would be careful about how you weight its merit.
Yes.
Thank you.
We kind of touched on some of that in the threats to validity. We didn't collect this personally identifiable information for privacy reasons. It makes it tougher to get through an IRB, institutional review board. But that's true. Another way to do this would be to run this through and sample it would be to run this through Amazon, the Mechanical Turk.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. This is the first, as Dr. Daniel stated, an exploratory survey. It's the first survey that I'm aware of that has been conducted in Nashville regarding this topic. So we're not saying this should be, this is the Bible or something that should be used to base your how you vote, or it's just a tool that can be used to provide some input if you did not have your own community discussions regarding this. Some members like myself had our own meetings, so I have feedback from individuals, residents who live in my district that I know. And of course, that would be the best data to use. But this is another tool for those who didn't do that. Councilman Withers.
Thank you so much, Chair Gamble. I mean, you know, I think there's a lot of really academic and theoretical debate about this, and that's all good. What I will share, and perhaps Councilmember O'Connell and Councilmember Sledge and some other council members will share this experience, is that in my case, I have the largest public housing development in the city of Nashville. Is located in District 6 when you combine CWA and Casey, as well as some adjacent affordable housing developments. And these communities have, for many, many decades now, been targeted by people coming into the community in cars, usually from outside the community, and bringing gun violence into their communities, shooting at residents, shooting at their children, running over their children, randomly firing guns that kill either their targets or innocent children who sometimes may be high school students who've worked through every plausible social service agency in our city that we offer, at the point of like possibly graduating high school at Stratford and getting scholarships because of their work, getting gunned down by violence by people pulling their cars into these neighborhoods, targeting my public housing residents who live in a community where their lease precludes them from owning a gun themselves. And they are sitting targets. And our community says we don't want our community, not Casey residents, but our advocacy community says we don't want police going in there, and we don't cameras. And so the effect of that is that we want our public housing residents living in multi-generational poverty, struggling with decades of neglect for their schools that they send their children to, for their job opportunities, for their access to transit, for their access to jobs, for their access to social services. We want them to be sitting targets for people driving into this community, dropping off stolen cars, shooting at them. This week, I had a person shoot 9 rounds into a car and wounded a person on Sylvan Street in Casey. This is a car. Now we had a little bit of camera video. Thank goodness Casey had a little bit of camera. We have an overall description of the car. But like, imagine if we had technology that would capture the license plates of that car so we could know where it went afterward. Imagine that. Because this is a car coming from outside the Casey community. The Casey residents don't know who this is. The Casey residents have fantastic relationships with the police department there in East.
Point of order, Madam Chair, is this on the survey?
So what I'm saying is like we're denying these communities that want protection from people driving into the communities, perpetrating gun violence on them, and we're going to deny them a possible tool to help at least identify who these cars are and where they're going because of ideological things. These are my
Councilman Weathers. I appreciate your comments.
Who are being shot and killed.
But we've got to stay on target here. We've got a lot to cover. So if you don't have a question, I appreciate your comments, but we need to move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I think Councilman Rosenberg, are you still is your hand still up from before, or do you have another question? Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Dr. Daniel. Again, we will share the survey with council members, the slides at a later time. If you have any other questions, his contact information is included in the survey. And at this time, we'll move on to Mr. Tom Sharp and Metro Public Health. I know you have someone else with you if you want to introduce him as well and give us kind of the information about your interest in using this technology for emissions testing.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good afternoon, members. I do, in fact, have Mike Terry, who represents the vendor for the remote sensing program, and I'll turn it over to him for any technical issues and some other things. He understands the program better than I do, but just a really quick contextual statement, if I could, Madam Chairman. So since we started testing vehicle emissions in 1984, we've always used the stationary garages that everyone is probably familiar with. And when we rebid the contract in 2017, we were looking for what technological improvements were available to us at that time to make the program more user-friendly. And we talked with, it's called HEAT, which is Hager Environmental and Atmospheric Technologies, HEAT. They're based in Knoxville, and they have a process where they can shoot a picture, in effect, of the plume that's coming out of the tailpipe of an automobile and assess the emissions gases in it. And then we can say yes or no. Yes, that's a passing test. That meets the standard that you would get at a garage, and it meets the standards that you need to get your license renewed, to get your license renewed. And the way the contract is written now, they could do up to potentially up to 30% of the entire fleet, which in Davidson County is about 180,000 cars. There will be a lot of details that are sort of behind the scenes about how many times a car has to go through and receive a passing emissions test. But the license plate readers come into play because if you drive your car past one of these sensors, it's basically, it's a type of radar, or LiDAR they call it. Mike can explain that better than I can, but it shoots down through the plume through a reflective strip that's on the street and assesses the plume. But to know whether, and that will tell us whether the car is within the proper emissions limits or not. But to know which car it is, we have to take a picture of the license plate at the same time to say, yes, that was Jennifer Gamble's car, Tom Sharp's car, whomever it's registered to, that car has received a passing test. And then the owner of that car will receive notification in the mail, your car has passed a remote sensing emissions test. You don't have to go to the garage if you don't want to. You can go to the website, pay the $9 fee, the same one you would pay if you went to the garage, and we will send you a passing emissions test, and then you can get your emission stickers. So that's the general basis of the process. And again, for any technical issues, I encourage you to ask Mike. But we've been doing it the same way for whatever that is, 35 or 6 years or whatever. A lot of people don't like taking time out of their day to go to the garages. We've tried to expand the hours and do a lot of other things to make it easier to do. We thought this would be a way to make it even easier yet for people to get their emissions tested. They might not even know they're driving under it. They've got 30 some odd potential places to set the cameras. They're mobile. They can set them here for a while and set them there for a while and set them there for a while. What we've told them is we didn't want them to set it just in the richest neighborhoods to get all the potentially the newest and cleanest cars, but to move them around and give everybody a chance to take advantage of this without going out of their way, just on their normal drive to work or whatever. So that's the plan. They have not yet been able to do this because the regulatory system had to get changed at the federal, state, and then it will be at the local level. All of that is in process to even allow this to occur. Their contract runs out in June, at the end of June of next year. So just a little bit over a year left in that contract. My strong feeling is that they might well not want to renew it unless they know they're going to be able to do this they haven't been able to do it at all yet. So I think we'd really love to get it going. That's not on you guys, that's the regulatory changes, because we really think people are going to like it. So that's why the license plate gets used, is so we can pinpoint the car that passed the test.
And once you pinpoint the car, then you'll send a letter to that, to the registered owner to let them know they passed the test.
That is correct.
And it would not be used, you're not interested in using it for everyone, just those who have passed the test, so that they won't then have to go to the testing center to get their emissions test.
That is correct. They can only do, under the current contracts at least, they can only do, that we've set aside a minimum of 25%, and then they and the garage vendor can sort of fight over 5%. So the most they could do is 30% of the fleet. And the Metro Code currently precludes us from using it for so-called dirty screening. So if a car drives by and it's really sending out an awful plume, we can't use it to find that person and say, you need to get your car fixed. That's precluded by the Metro Code at this point.
Okay. Okay, we have a couple of questions in the queue, and we have in this order, Councilmember Murphy, Stiles, and then Henderson. Councilmember Murphy.
Thank you, Council Lady Gamble. This is Council Lady Murphy. Tom, either one of y'all could answer this. It sounds like two questions. This might be more for Mike. So if I drive through this and my tags don't need to be renewed for 6 more months, you're still shooting that camera at me, right?
Yes, if it's on, it's on.
Would I still get a letter saying that I'm good to go?
Well, those are among the details that we will work out with Heat when we get close to the time of them actually going into action. Is how many times does a car have to pass? How close to its renewal date does it have to be for that to count as a passing test? What exactly are the cut points for the plumes, the nature of what's coming out of the tailpipe to be a passing test, and all that kind of thing. And we'll work that out with them. It'll probably be, it might be as much as 6 months, but you'll probably have to do it at least twice within that period, so that we don't just happen to catch you on a really happy car day, but make sure that that's really its standard operating status.
So on one hand, like that is nice, because I do know that, some people might go and their car fails and then they're hit with a really big bill. So it might be nice to know ahead of time that your car might fail and be able to save up or have some wiggle room to get that car fixed, other than the like 30 days. Not that.
Well, we would not tell you if you.
Right.
We're not going to tell you if you failed it.
Oh, you would not tell me if
No,
I failed.
we're not allowed to use it by Metro Code for dirty screening.
Okay. Well, we can think through that when it comes up. My main question here is how many, so I assume this would be not just a convenience thing. It's being pitched to us as a convenience thing, but I'm assuming that it's also going to save money in the terms of people going through the sheds. Is that correct?
Well, they won't have to make that additional trip if that's what you mean by saving money. It will still cost them $9.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying is my concern is that while it's a convenience thing, and these may not be Metro employees per se, it does sound like it would be cutting jobs from the emissions testing program. Would that be a fair conclusion?
They may or may not need the same number of folks. That'll be up to them. They have the ability to do, or they have the contractual obligation to do up to 75% of the fleet. So they have to have enough people to do that. Our concern about their employment numbers and all that is that they have enough people to do that and keep the wait times at some contractual minimums that we've set.
Okay. Well, I'll be watching and interested in that, because while yes, this is something that we have privatized, that we don't employ Metro, they aren't Metro employees. At the end of the day, I don't want us to be, we have a lot of legislation that comes through and tells us it's convenient for our constituents, and that may be the case, but what are we doing for employment numbers? And that's something, Mike, that Mike Terry, I'd be happy to talk to you more on another time as we get closer to that. You know how to reach me. So thanks so much, Council Lady Gamble. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilmember Stiles.
Thank you, Chair. Could you please explain, in terms of this contract, it doesn't exist, correct? The hope is that we include the use of the LPRs for emissions now, and that the contract will actually come into existence at some point and we don't have to come back and amend the bill?
No, ma'am, that the contract exists. But it was signed with the understanding by both Hager Environmental and Atmospheric Technologies and us and the state. We're actually agents of the state in this respect, that there would be some regulatory changes that had to take place before it could be effectuated. So the contract exists. They've signed it. Metro has signed it. It is in place. They just can't go to work here yet because right now it's not legal regulatory wise. It's an EPA decision and a state decision, and then ultimately it will come back to Metro and we will align with what they allow us to do in this respect.
Any other questions, Councilmember Stiles?
Yes, I wanted to wait until you asked me if I had another question. So we're waiting on regulatory action, but we don't know when or if that's going to happen.
It's happening now. So what happened this is probably before the latest batch of council members came in. So Mike, was it 2018, somewhere in that range? The state legislature, in effect, banned emissions testing everywhere except Davidson County, and said if Davidson County wanted the option to keep it, then it would require action of the Metro Council. The Metro Council acted to say, we want to have the decision made locally as to whether to keep this program or not when the time comes to make that decision. And the Metro Council approved that. And so the state then, under the pressure of the legislative ban on everything else, amended the state implementation plan, which is the state's promise to the EPA for what it will do to control air quality, and asked them to amend the state implementation plan to take that vehicle emissions testing out everywhere, I believe, and say this is what, and so that the state's agreement with the feds does not include emissions testing, at least in 94 counties. And so that process has been underway for a couple of years now. And we expect that will be approved and published in the Federal Register, which is what is the trigger for it's now legal here, within, the next few months, hopefully.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Stiles?
Somewhat. I think if, once again, we're hoping in a few months that it passes, but if it doesn't, then we're just including this potentially in legislation for no reason. I guess that's my concern. Is there a reason not to wait until it actually goes through to include it?
Ms. Stiles, it's gonna be the law relatively soon that we can do this. That all the background work has been done. The feds have signed off on it. They just haven't published it in the Federal Register yet. We will then have to amend the Board of Health rules to align with what is allowable then so that they can do this. But all of those regulatory changes are going to happen by all accounts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I had kind of federal state regulatory environment questions, so those have been answered. I also wanted to ask Mr. Sharp, could you restate, you said based on kind of the percentages of the contract, this emissions could be done for up to, you referred to fleet, but what you mean is registered cars in Davidson County, right? 180K. As I understand it, we have more or almost as many registered cars as we have citizens. We have something like 680,000 registered vehicles in Davidson County. So what was the intent in that percentage breakdown? Was it just to kind of disperse the testing across the sites, or can you just sort of speak to that percentage breakdown and how that decision was made? And are y'all thinking of this as a pilot? Do we know other I guess other states don't do it because it wasn't established at the federal level, but can somebody kind of speak to the pilot aspect of it and then just how the percentage was chosen? Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll let Mike speak to the other states issue, but it is done in other states. And the percentage was established by the EPA, that was the limit of the amount that we could go to for remote sensing. So that's why we wrote in the contract that way. And Mike, if you want to weigh in on the other state issue, feel free.
Yeah, as Tom said, the EPA set that percentage number that we were interested in, and remote sensing is happening in a number of states across the country. It is what has been we've been working with the EPA on is the technology that he developed is far superior to the technology that had been in place. And so it took a while for the EPA and states to realize how sensitive the technology is in measuring the molecules that come out of the tailpipe. So like to date, we've worked with the state of California, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, council member. All right, I don't see any other hands in the queue. So I appreciate you, Mr. Sharp and Mr. Mike Terry for joining us today and answering questions regarding the emissions testing. You're welcome to stay on, or if you want to hop off, that's fine too. We'll move into our next update from Deputy Chief Green, Dwayne Green, about MMPD's update on the patrol cars, on using the license plate technology on patrol cars. And then we'll go into our Q&A discussion.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dwayne Green, Deputy Chief of the Community Services Bureau for the Metro Nashville Police Department, which encompasses all the precincts. First, I want to thank you all for holding this meeting today. Very important. When we talk about LPRs, we have to look at instruments of crime. Violent crime is something that we're dealing with nationwide, and specifically in Nashville, violent crime, if you watch the news every day. And when we talk about instruments of crime, stolen vehicles are an instrument of crime. Many crimes are committed, and most are committed in stolen vehicles. And so we've started an initiative over the last month or so, which is a PRISM initiative, which is a precision recovery initiative of munitions as well as stolen vehicles. When we look at dealing with violent crime, we look at taking away the instruments of those crimes, and recovering stolen vehicles is one of the ways that we have addressed it. We recently seen a decrease in our violent crime because we have been recovering vehicles. In a 1 week period, we had 50 vehicles stolen in Nashville, and we recovered 65. Some of those vehicles came from stolen vehicles out of county. So that initiative is working, but it is labor intensive. And as you know, Nashville has grown and calls for service are up. So we do the best as we can with the number of the manpower that we have. When talking about LPRs, some people would just talk about the violent crime, but we have to look at violent crime. We also have to look at the street racing issue that we have in Nashville that's very rampant, which will assist in that. I'll start with violent crime though. We look at the incident that occurred in Mount Juliet this week involving an individual in domestic related incident where he committed a homicide in Wilson County and came into Nashville. Because he had a cell phone which he kept active, we were able to ping his cell phone. But if we did not have that information, LPRs would have played a vital role in telling us where he was in the city. Because this was considered to be an active killer situation, we were on heightened alert. We were able to ping his cell phone, but through LPR, we could have brought that to a more peaceful resolution by knowing his immediate location if he entered into Davidson County through the use of LPRs. Another way is that we recently had a elderly couple that came up missing. You may have seen the alert. They ended up in Kentucky. The wife subsequently passed away. No one knew where they were. We did not have any cell phone data. but to be able to use of LPR would have told us the last place they were in the city. So that's another significant use of LPRs. And I believe it was Councilman Withers spoke about MDHA property. As you all know, we had a 3-year-old that was shot and subsequently succumbed to the injuries of gunshot wound on last night on the MDHA property in the Cumberland View housing. That is an issue that we're constantly dealing with. Officers are going through every day looking for vehicles that are on our hot list or hot sheets that may be involved in those type of incidents. So just to speak to that a little bit, that we're advocates for LPRs. Currently, the Nashville Airport Authority has LPRs, use of LPRs, as well as Tennessee Highway Patrol. Just this week, coming up on Thursday, we're starting an initiative with Tennessee Highway Patrol where we're looking to recover more stolen vehicles, because we realize if we take that instrument of crime away from individuals that are committing violent crimes, it lowers our crime. So equipping us with that will definitely be a plus for us, and also help us to bring violent incidents to a peaceful resolution a lot quicker. Prevents us from having to engage in vehicle pursuits, because we know what the car is through the use of LPRs and aviation. We won't have to pursue a vehicle, but use a coordinated effort to take those subjects into custody. So that is all I have as it relates to that, and any questions that you all may have of me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that information. I do see Council Member Murphy in the queue. You have the floor.
Thank you. I just have a brief question, and I'm not sure if you can answer this or if it needs to maybe be answered when we're talking about amendments, or send it off to be answered after this meeting. I think when we're talking about this legislation, I want to make sure that we are balancing constituents and Nashvillians and our visitors' privacy along with our safety concerns here. And I've had some violent gun crime involving cars in my district close to the interstate and things like that. So one thing that I've not seen the data point on, if there is one, is how long, is there any information about how long we keep this data and effectiveness with solving crimes? For example, I know in other countries it's kept for a long time. Is there any is there I don't want to say sweet spot, that's not the right word that I'm looking for, but is there like some amount of time that you're going to be able to say, if we keep it for 3 years, we're more likely to solve crimes as opposed to indefinitely, or opposed to 6 months? I guess my only reference point is crime shows in Britain where they have it for a very long time and seem to solve murders years afterwards or something. Do we have any of that data that is relevant to Nashville on keeping the data and being able to solve crimes?
So recently myself, Deputy Chief Taylor and Chief Drake took a trip to Atlanta, Georgia, and met with Atlanta PD, went into visited their video integration center. Currently, Atlanta has 13,000 LPRs in the city of Atlanta. While inside of that venue, within 5 minutes, we probably had 6 or 7 stolen vehicles pop up on the screen, and officers were dispatched to those locations and peacefully resolve those issues in the city of Atlanta. One of the questions that we did ask as it relates to retention of data, they advise they keep their data at approximately 14 months, which I think that is a reasonable time if you think about prosecution, 11 months and 29 days, things of that nature. I know Commander Gilder is on the call. He works in strategic development, and he may want to chime in on that as relates to that question as well.
That would be great if he has any more information, because that's what a side comment up there too is when Councilman Pulley and I were in Belfast 2 summers ago for Sister Cities, they have CCTV all over the place, and it was interesting. And I know that he talked more with their police force about it, but I would like to have more of an American reference. So if you do have that, please share it, or if you could email more of that to us.
Captain Gilder, would you like to add?
Yes, ma'am. So the state law right now limits the retention, I believe, to 90 days. So that would be the absolute maximum that we would be able to retain this. I think the longest version on any of the bills that have been filed is 30 days. So, I think for us, typically, within that time frame that's been proposed, the 30-day time frame, we likely would, the vast majority of cases that occur, we probably would have some knowledge of that and would be able to go back and utilize that. Obviously, the more you shorten it, the more less likely it is that we're gonna be able to capture that information and utilize it. So I think, obviously that's up to the council, but I think the maximum timeline we're looking at is 30 days. But if you're talking about disposing of it in minutes, then it's virtually useless as a crime fighting tool, because we're never going to get to it if a crime happens and a car passes by it and then it's almost immediately disposed of. We wouldn't be able to solve crimes with it. It would only be efficient if it was an officer right there with the camera mounted in the car.
Okay, and so one last question. I'll be quick, Council Lady Gamble. I'm sorry to be a little chatty today. So if the sunset provision does go on this legislation, I am hoping, but I don't want to assume, would y'all be able to give us a report or statistics at the end of the period telling us how many crimes were solved and how quickly they were solved, or something along those lines to help us when we have this discussion and debate again?
Yes, ma'am. I think that's possible for us to do. In fact, I know that Chair Lady Gamble's amendment I was reading the other day specifically speaks to tracking LPR usage and when it was used to make stops and solve crimes. And so I certainly think that's something that we can provide the council on an annual basis or a periodic timeline, whatever you all feel comfortable with.
Great. I think that would make me feel much more comfortable. So thank you, Council Lady Gamble. I will unraise my hand and give you back your meeting.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions and that kind of great segue into the discussion about the particular bills. And I invite all of the guests to stay on because we may have other questions as we get into the discussion about the bills. We will get started with BL 2025-81 by Councilman O'Connell. If you would give us a brief description of what your bill does, and also you have two amendments, so you may as well go right into those two amendments as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I will note this bill is really originated from a previous bill introduced by Councilmember Rosenberg that was really designed to add clarifying language to the existing provision in Metro Code of Laws. I look at this as basically a technical corrections bill. It was subsequently, after this discussion began in earnest in council, we took suggested language from a previously offered amendment to ensure that the technical corrections themselves would not interfere with the deployment of the body-worn camera and dash cam program being implemented by Metro Nashville Police Department. But really, this just clarifies issues about the public right-of-way. Depending on the final outcome of BL 2025-82, this bill might or might not be necessary. This is the reason I recommended actually tracking it sequentially after BL 2025-82. I still think when we get to the floor for discussion, I would encourage colleagues to allow for the agenda to be taken out of order so that we complete discussion of BL 2025-82 and proposed substitute rather than trying to pass this and then have the discussion about BL 2025-82. This is not a comprehensive bill. This basically offers two technical clarifications, one about the orientation of LPRs in public right-of-way, and the other actually introducing an allowance for the dash cam program in particular to avoid the successful, any issues with the successful implementation of that program. I believe the amendments are just housekeeping. It has been long enough since I reviewed those that I don't recall. I don't know if Mr. Cooper is here with us this afternoon, or maybe Ms. Zeitlin.
Councilman, we're actually both on here.
Okay, well, then you all, each of you can take one of the amendments.
If you'll hang on just a second. So there are two amendments. The first one incorporates the parking enforcement provision into the bill.
That's right.
And then the second one limits its application to making it unlawful for any Metro official.
That's right.
The LPRs.
We did get some analysis from legal that basically made sure that the applicability was Metro specific because there were First Amendment concerns about a more broadly applied bill. So the amendments, I would consider both of them to be friendly, possibly necessary for overall success. Again, the overall bill and my recommendation should track after the completion of discussion and voting on BL 2025-82, but I'm happy to take any other questions about this.
We thank you for that summary. We do have questions in the queue. We'll start with Councilmember Johnston and then Councilmember Cash. You're recognized. Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. This question is more for Director Cooper or Hannah. I think on the surface, it looks like 581 and 582 may not conflict with each other, but I have a feeling that the legal eagles would disagree. And so in order to avoid a cluster, regardless of who goes first, 581 or 582, what would happen in each of those scenarios? Say 581 passes first, then 582 as amended passes, or if 582 goes first and passes, then if 581 goes afterwards and passes, then what happens? How is the legal world going to deal with with that?
So the first thing you do is try and make everything that the council pass work. In this case, if there are conflicting provisions, then whatever passes latest in time will prevail. So there are a number of conflicts that will have to be dealt with both internally to 582 with the various amendments and substitute, and then as well as working with 581.
That was my fear. Thank you so much for clarifying.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Cash.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions about the amendments, and I've heard what just transpired in terms of tracking. But one of the amendments to 581 allows for LPR scanners in law enforcement vehicles, and it's, I believe, disallowed in public right-of-way, while the other amendment allows for the use of license plate readers or scanners in parking enforcement or for parking enforcement, but is limited to existing in the right-of-way. It doesn't seem to have a provision for it being in a vehicle. So, and similarly, those in law enforcement vehicles are manned, there's a person with it, and the ones for parking enforcement are, I'm assuming, by themselves. So I guess my question is the idea that the meters themselves the new meters that we get will hold the LPR technology, or are they going to be separate cameras but limited to metered areas? And depending on that answer, I might have another question.
I'm going to let the administration speak to the one about metered enforcement, because I consider that one a friendly amendment they asked for with regard to the overall smart parking proposal that is continuing to evolve. So I said I did not object to introducing an amendment that would enable that program to be successful, obviously contingent upon whatever proposal comes for subsequent council approval. But I would maybe invite Mr. Jameson or another representative of the administration to speak to the intent of that amendment. But broadly, the intent is to, I mean, I look at the overall bill as trying to limit broad sort of universal applicability, really just offering a technical clarification about the definition of right-of-way, and then not interfering with dash cam or the smart parking program otherwise. And then again, based on legal analysis, not being applicable only to Metro in that regard.
Mr. Jameson, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair Lady Gamble, and thank you, Councilman Cash, for the question. With respect to the LPR placement specifically, the information that we are receiving from preliminary inquiries from vendors was that their devices, the parking devices themselves could, if selected by the city, include essentially the pinhole camera if permitted by the council. We then reached out to each of the council members that had some version of LPR legislation pending, and in discussions with each, and including Councilman O'Connell, for whom we're grateful working through this, we're able to include this amendment so that the smart parking program could continue. We'll find out as the RFP process continues exactly what their proposed technology is. Some will undoubtedly come with parking meters that have no camera system, but obviously there are those that do, and we wanted to make sure the that the council enjoyed every option in proceeding with a vendor.
Councilman Cash.
Yeah, yes. So I guess it seems that the two amendments have passed don't allow them to be in vehicles, whereas, you know, for our non-metered areas, we've got parking enforcement vehicles that are, you know, going around in many different places. And I do see online that there are, you know, capabilities of putting them in vehicles, and might even be cheaper than the standing cameras themselves. So I guess is the intent that we not use these scanners in parking vehicles, or we just not thought that through yet? I guess is my question.
The sole issue that we needed to make sure we were not creating was the prohibition within the meters themselves. So the amendment that came from the administration addressed solely that. Whatever the council decides to do with their placement within vehicles, we leave to the council, but we do appear to have a pathway towards allowing smart parking for the devices.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. All right, I don't see any other hands in the queue, so we will move on to BL 2025-82, the description and intent by Councilmember Johnston, and then we'll take questions. Councilmember, you recognize.
Thank you again, Chair. So on previous meetings, I've gone through the story of how I came up with the initial draft of 582, and the vast majority of it taking into account people's concerns with privacy. And so really leaning hard on a policing policy paper written in conjunction with the ACLU, and then further took it to ACLU-TN and made some other changes and additions to it. It's, you know, I feel like it's pretty comprehensive from a privacy perspective, from usage, from authorized users, descriptions of people that have access, retention, security, access. I already said access. I'm sorry. So sharing, creating an audit of the system, mandatory, a reporting feature, and the reporting feature is at the very end, and I think someone else brought that up as far as can we look at how LPRs have been used to gauge their success? I think that was Council Lady Murphy. And so part 7 in 582 2 addresses that. And it's already racial and ethnic and gender information that is collected on every vehicle stop anyway. And if this passes, they would just create a box on that existing form to check to see whether or not an LPR was used in that stop or not. And so we will be able to track those pretty easily. We have disciplinary actions in here that are, pretty stiff, and there's another amendment to it that expounds on that. The intent of this bill is to increase the safety of Nashvillians regardless of their color. And keeping in mind everyone's privacy, no one wants to invade anyone's privacy. And I appreciate the concern about the over-criminalization of the Black and Brown community. My concern is that the Black and Brown community is over-victimized. That's the stories that I get from my constituents is in my Black and Brown community, that they are fearful. And I've said this before too, so I don't want to hamper down on it. But they're literally scared to be on their front porches and in their front yards and really in the front part of their house, because we've got drive-by shootings. We have, in my opinion, a public safety crisis. I'm tired of seeing it on the news. I'm tired of getting the email press releases from the police where people have died. I'm tired of it. So, everywhere that I have seen that LPRs have been in use, those communities have been impacted in a positive way as it relates to public safety. And so that is the intent of my bill. I'm actually excited about a lot of these amendments because I love that we've collaborated so well and are really working together to make this, the best piece of legislation that it possibly can be, to have, all of the good stuff and minimize any of the bad stuff. And so I appreciate everyone's contribution to it, and I'm ready to get started. So I can take questions on the initial bill now, or I can move into my amendment that was nodding your head. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great if you move into your amendment, and then we can take questions on both.
Yeah, sure. So my first amendment, it has a couple of things, and we were just talking about the retention. And so the bill started off with a 30-day retention, understanding that 90 days was the limit per the state. And I wanted us to be able to keep it long enough for it to be useful, but to not keep it long enough where people would feel uncomfortable with it. I will remind everyone that the state has line itemed out this data from any public records requests. So those fears should be quashed at this point. But I did reduce down to 10 days after, I don't know how many of our meetings, and we were discussing, and I heard just people didn't like being held for that long. There is a risk that we will miss some opportunity to find and or prosecute. Because of that, there are certain types of crimes that do take a while sometimes to be even reported. Those are usually surrounding like domestic violence and rape and those things that carry a lot of shame around them. So that is the risk of that, but I'm trying to balance out positive and negative. So I did move it down to 10 days. And the other thing, it actually came from Councilman Rosenberg's substitute. The one part that I liked out of it just added another layer of some transparency, where the public defender as well as the DA's office have access to the access logs, so that we can make sure that both of those offices can make sure that the data is being used in the way that it's supposed to, and we're following along with the ordinance. I did change a little bit of it because what's in the substitute gives also access to the server that this database would be held on. And more than likely, the server that the database would be held on, the LPR database would be held on, will be the same database that the NCIC database is held on. And so anyone having access to that would violate the agreements that we have with NCIC, which obviously we don't want to be kicked out of that database. And so I just removed the server. I think having access to the audit records is enough to add that transparency. And so that's really it. I'm actually going to add something to it because there was a typo in the first part of section 1G 1A. No, I'm sorry, 1. Anyway, it's just a typo that I'm correcting, so that will be added. But that's pretty much it for my amendment.
Great, thank you for that synopsis. And we do have a question in the queue. Councilmember Sepulveda.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for sponsor, but maybe better by Attorney Cooper. So I do know that the state did make sure that it wouldn't be available for an open records request, but I believe that was for 5 years. Am I mistaken?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So we have over 500 exceptions to the Open Records Act, where things are line itemed out and people don't have access to that. The General Assembly always puts a sunset on those sunsets, but they are always extended. And so when that was pointed out via email a few days ago, I did reach out to a couple of representatives just to make sure. And it was 100% that it will be extended, that there should be no fear around that. And then also, if we're deleting this data after 10 days anyway, it's a small amount really. So when you think about the mechanics of an open records request, if you only have 10 days worth of data, once that open records request is processed, you've taken 3, 4, 5 days off of that anyway. So the open records is just really, to me, not a concern. Additionally, unless you have access to another database where you can cross-reference a license plate with DMV records, for example, to find out who is attached to that license plate, the data really is sort of useless. Like, I don't even know my license plate number, but if I looked at it, I would have, like, who knows, what that is. So it really is, innocuous information.
Well, I don't trust the state as far as I could throw them. So my concern would be that they decide to come back and not extend it, right? But at the end of the day, Director Cooper, correct me if I'm wrong, this doesn't keep ICE from requesting records, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Now, if they made a public records request, it would be not provided under the confidentiality provisions of the state law. But if they got a subpoena or a court order or something, we would have to turn it over.
Thank you.
I'd like to say
as a brown woman, I don't feel victimized. I do want to note that Turk Conexión, the Community Oversight Board, the Mix, Workers' Dignity, and several other groups are writing letters against this legislation. I have another question of who conducts the audit?
That would be, hold on. Probably the custodian, or
Okay.
someone that the custodian would identify.
Great. I know that one group who is interested in doing business with Metro Vigilant Solutions does have a contract with Homeland Security to share data with ICE. There is something in the legislation that says if they wish to keep the data for more than 30 days, there must be a written request. Has that changed since you changed the timeline to 10 days?
Everything that references 30 days would be changed to 10 days.
Okay, so there's the possibility of the data being kept for more than 10 days, depending on what the situation is. Is there a guideline as to what that would look like?
No. I guess it would be incumbent upon whoever's requesting that to the custodian for the custodian to decide whether or not that is something they're going to agree to or not. And I think they would have to follow along with all of the sharing and access and, you know, all of the other policies within the ordinance.
And who can make the request?
I guess anybody. So which part are you asking about? Because I need to.
1 second. This is in the original bill.
Section.
I'm looking. Director Cooper, maybe you could find it before we do.
I think that you're referring to the section where it talks about any user. So any user of the system would be able to request an extension of that under those circumstances.
Yep.
Right, but I'm trying to find the actual language.
It's under G4 B.
Yeah, so the users are already restricted.
What does it look like when the data is misused or misaccessed by one of the users? Because that wasn't in this language. It just says that there will be consequences, but you talked about there being specifics.
Well, disciplinary action in accordance with applicable civil service policies up to and including termination. I do have another amendment that's coming forward that actually steepens that, which I find friendly. And I think you can speak to Councilman or Council Lady Stiles about that. She'll be able to speak to that. But again, I find that friendly. I think it just adds criminal penalties as well.
Great. Those are all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Great questions. Thank you. I do not see any other hands in the queue. Also, we will go to the next amendment. Councilmember Stiles, if you'd like to tell us about your amendment.
Very much, Chair. So as Councilor Johnston mentioned, this is an amendment just to make it a little bit clearer, as there are privacy concerns and surveillance concerns. So this lines out exactly what the LPRs will be tracking. So reckless driving, anything over 70 miles per hour, stolen vehicles, stolen plates, violent crimes. It allows the smart parking pilot program, the tracking of that, silver alerts and amber alerts, but it also specifies what we will not use the equipment for, which is no surveillance, no facial recognition, no tracking for repossessed cars, no expired tags, and also no insurance verification. The information that is collected will never be sold. That is within this amendment. It specifies that if an officer does get a ping through the hot list, that the data that's coming in has to be verified, that you're looking at the plate and looking at the system to be sure that information is accurate before approaching a vehicle. Also verifying that the data for the day has been updated. So that's been a problem in the past in some other cities where the information was inaccurate. So requiring that. Also, in terms of access, no more than 10 persons per department that has access to the LPRs would be able to get into the system. And so that came from a conversation that I had with Chief Drake specifically, and he said that he could not see more than 10 people having access within MNPD. There would be 2 members from council and 1 member from the Community Oversight Board that would also have the ability to look at the information to be sure that the audit trail is being followed. Of course, within the equipment, you are able to see who's logged on and every activity that they've done. But this amendment also requires that there is a physical audit log that is kept. So we have a 2-step verification in that sense. Along with Councilmember Johnston, I also have a retention of 10 days for the data And if more than that, a written request is required. And every 2 months, reporting. Every 2 months, I'm proposing that this is a pilot program, much like with my previous bill. I think this is something that we need to see the data before we commit to fully rolling this out. And this amendment requests that we receive a report every 2 months from MNPD to let us know what crimes have been closed due to the use of this equipment. And that at the end of the 6 months, we would continue this legislation by resolution. And if we did pick it up for resolution, the every 2 months would change to every 3 months for a quarterly report from MNPD about how things are going. And I think I have covered it all. And I know that with my amendment, I'm proposing that the resolution takes place at the end of the 6 months. If we do decide after hearing from getting 3 different reports, that's when we determine that we want to move forward. And I believe there's another amendment that kind of flips that. So I do want to say that we probably need to discuss that. That might help us out a lot in whittling these amendments down for next week. So if anyone has any questions.
Yes, we do have questions in the queue. Councilmember Johnston, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Council Lady Stiles, for all of your work on this. A couple of things. I know that so the last part deletes everything about the emissions program. And so the health department's probably freaking out a little bit. So I wanted to see sort of what your thoughts are now that we've heard from Tom Sharp on how it works and all that. And that I want to point out this was already in the original code. And when we were so I'm just wondering, so that we don't ruffle a lot of feathers and mess up a program that was sort of already in the queue, if that's something that you would consider putting back in.
Councilmember Stiles.
Thank you. I'm going to stay in order. So thank you, Councilmember Johnson. I'm willing to consider it. At this point, really, my goal is for us to move forward with legislation and to find a sweet spot. As Councilmember Murphy said, this is the moment to try and find the sweet spot. And so if that is a point of contention, then by all means, I am willing to put it back in. And forgive me, but I did also want to mention the penalty because Councilmember Johnson had brought it up before. So if anyone is to disturb any of the equipment or affect any of the data, this is a Class C felony, and it's punishable with imprisonment from 3 to 15 years and a fine not to exceed $10,000. So that is clearly laid out here. And this also gives the DA and anyone that they assign access to this data to be able to do the prosecution. And I did speak with DA Funk, and he provided this information for me for what the penalties would be.
Perfect. Oh, sorry. I guess I need to recognize.
Go ahead.
In an order, out of order. So thank you. I think that probably putting the emissions back in would probably help, at least for Tom Sharp to not have a stroke, and I certainly don't want that to happen. I think everybody, or I'm hoping everyone feels comfortable that it's not meant to be misused. It really is going to save you however many. I know I've sat in that line for over 2 hours before, so I would pay gladly double to not have to do that. So anyway, I did want to sort of go into, and I guess this is going to get into Council Lady Hertz. I find a pilot program very friendly, but obviously they conflict with each other. And so obviously we don't want a cluster. So I guess we just need to discuss as a body what those differences are. And I think it may be helpful for Hannah or Director Cooper to sort of just compare the pilot program that's detailed out in Council Lady Stiles' amendment to Council Lady Hertz's amendment and just figure out which one is better so that we can move forward. I think we all want to move forward. but we just need to work this little guy out.
Yes, before we do that, Councilmember Hurd is on the call, so I would like to give her the opportunity to explain her amendment and the intent, and then we'll get into the differences between the two and get Director Cooper and Ms. Zeitlin to help us with that. Councilmember Hurd, would you like to tell us about your amendment? Okay, she's on the call, but maybe she doesn't.
Maybe she just doesn't want to tell us about it.
Councilmember Hurd, we can't hear you if you're speaking.
I'm happy to sign on to it just to explain it, or Hannah.
Well, yeah, we can let Director Cooper and Hannah explain it. I just wanted to give her the opportunity since she was on the call. All right, she's either not hearing us or can't get through. So if you all want to go on and talk about the difference between the two and how we need to clear that up.
This is Hannah. I'm happy to explain the amendment. One thing that I do want to go back to real quick, I tried to raise my hand and I don't know that anybody saw me. So I just wanted to make clear. So in Council Lady Stiles' amendment, it does reference state offenses, state criminal offenses, but that is not something that is actually a penalty that is due to that amendment, if that makes sense. Those are already remedies that are available at state law, regardless of whether that's in the amendment. It's just a reference to the state law penalty. That's a potential penalty. It's not actually instituting that as a penalty. So to discuss the HURT amendment, the pilot program, it does kind of, I've bulleted out to 4 things. So each department would engage in their own pilot program of between 6 months and 9 months. At the conclusion, a report would be sent to the council on the efficacy of the program. The council has 60 days to review the program and then could terminate the program during that 60-day period by resolution. If the council doesn't terminate the program by resolution, the department is authorized to fully implement the LPR system. So in the Stiles amendment, the pilot program is a 6-month pilot program for Metro. At the end of 6 months, the program terminates automatically unless approved by the council by a resolution receiving 21 votes. I think that I might have made a typo on this one too. I'm not sure if it's intended to only apply to MNPD or if it's to apply to all Metro departments. So that may be something that Council Lady Stiles might need to speak to.
And
oh, go ahead.
Chair, if I could jump in, I think the biggest difference, in addition to the 6-month and 9-month thing, is that one would terminate it automatically if the council didn't act. The other would allow it to continue forever if the council didn't act.
Right. Okay, I do see a question or hands raised in the queue. We'll start with Councilmember Sepulveda and then Councilmember Johnston. Councilmember Sepulveda, you recognize.
Thank you, Chair. Just some clarifying questions. With the regards to the information will never be sold. If there is an agreement with, if this passes and the vendor has an agreement with Homeland Security, does that not count as sharing, or Director Cooper, can you help? If they have a contract with Homeland Security, the information
if it is Metro's data, then I don't think a contract that the vendor has with Homeland Security would allow them to provide that. I think they would have to get that information from Metro. And there is a state law that requires local governments to cooperate with federal officials if they ask for stuff. But I don't think that the vendor would be able to turn over our data without us providing it.
Great.
Councilmember Stiles, you want to add to that?
Thank you. I'm glad that my face was showing on your screen so you could see my finger pointing. Yes, when we take possession of the equipment and set it up wherever we're going to do it, that information solely belongs to us. It cannot be touched by anyone else and would be open to the penalties that I mentioned in the other section of the amendment.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
council member.
Thank you. Thank you all.
It's up for ice, right? Now, I have one more question. So I know that you said that this sunsets after 6 months and then it's brought back to see if we will use it again. I know that before the legislation that you were working on early on was just for specifically targeting drag racing. Would this legislation open it up for all types of police work?
I'm not sure who can answer that. Go ahead, Councilmember Stiles.
So the answer is yes. So it was drag racing previously, but because we have expanded the conversation to be inclusive of other potential crimes, those are listed out in the amendment in the very first section. It says what we'll use it for. So that's the violent crime, that's silver, amber alerts, stolen vehicles or plates. Also the reckless driving, as we heard from, I do not remember his last name, but I guess he was Detective Dwayne from the MNPD, who mentioned this can be very useful in terms of that particular issue. And then all the items that we won't use it for, which I think is also very important for us to make clear for those people that have concerns about how this equipment can be abused. I think that answers your question, but if it doesn't, let me know.
Yes. I did have some questions for Mr. Green, but I think you didn't get to see my hand before we went into the specific legislation. So after, I guess, we're done, if we could come back, that would be helpful.
Yeah, we can. Deputy Chief Green, are you still on with us? I'm not sure.
Ma'am, this is Commander Gilder. I think he had to jump off the call, but I'll be around. So
Okay. Well, can do you think Councilmember Sepulveda that Commander Captain Green might be able to answer, Gilder may be able to answer your question?
Yeah. So I had a question in regards to if this was deployed and we had LPRs in right-of-ways. I know that we are already short police officers and units. My concern that has been brought up is that this wouldn't be as effective if we don't have enough units to actually respond when there is a hit. So an argument that has been made is that this masks the overall problem that we have in this city. It also causes, communities to mistrust, and especially when the police department is trying to and is supposed to be, reaching out to community members and building trust and building bridges. So I don't know if you have any data as far as how likely you would be able to respond to a situation if there was an LPR hit.
yes, ma'am. So I don't have hard data, obviously, since we've not utilized these yet to this point. I think to your point about manpower. Yes, there is certainly a manpower issue. That's an issue we're working to address every day through recruitment and retention. I still think that the LPR system is a force multiplier in a couple of ways. One, while we don't have the amount of officers that we would like to have, they are still out there. They are still in the neighborhood. So if there are hits and alerts are going to cars, there very well may be officers that are available to respond to that. The other piece where the system is useful is solving crimes. And so if we don't have officers in the area and a crime occurs and we don't have a good description, we might be able to utilize the LPR system to obtain, very objective information about suspect vehicles instead of having to rely on witness information, which may or may not be correct, which goes to that issue of community trust that you brought up. So.
Yeah. Okay. I struggle with that because it could be possible that we get a hit on an LPR system and we might not have a unit nearby. That means that we would probably have to have more LPRs deployed to be able to track with a vehicle's location. And then it's just a never-ending cycle and a LPR on every corner. But that helps answer my question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Stiles, and then Councilmember Porterfield, and Councilmember Johnston, do you still have a question, or is that an old hand? Okay. Councilmember Stiles, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think I was going to respond to something that has already been addressed, but I do want to, again, emphasize, I hope that we'll talk about the pilot and those two differences. So we're here in our work group, so we can make some good solid decisions moving forward and spare ourselves some time on the floor.
Thank you. Councilmember Porterfield, and then Chair Nash. I see your hand raised as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. My question was actually for, is it Deputy Chief Green? Is that his, I know he's off now, but is that his title? Is
yes,
Deputy
yes,
Chief? Okay.
yes.
So there was, I interpreted something that was said as conflicting information. So if we can maybe get a answer to that. I believe that, I'm not sure, is it Officer Gilder? Is that your title? Is Mr. Gilder's title officer? I'm sorry, y'all, I want to get the titles correct.
You might correct us because I've been calling you Captain Gilder, so Commander Gilder.
Commander
Yes,
Gilder, okay. Thank you. Now, I believe when we earlier on in the conversation, when we were talking about LPRs, I believe Commander Gilder, I believe it was Commander Gilder, spoke to our committee, and my interpretation of that conversation was that LPRs would not be a good fit for the issue of drag racing, which is what we were initially looking at it for. And it seemed as though today Deputy Chief Green said that it would be useful for that. So I would just like to get some clarification on which one is the correct information. And then this question may be best answered by Director Cooper. I'm not clear. There was a little bit of conversation around the 10-day. If someone wanted that information, or if they wanted to hold it longer than the 10 days, like under what circumstances would someone request that, and under what circumstances might that be granted? The question was asked earlier. I just didn't get clarification on it.
Okay. Director Cooper, can you answer that, or who?
I can answer the second question. The bill doesn't provide these specific reasons. It just provides a mechanism for it to be extended if the user, which is one of the users of the system, makes a request and his or her supervisor approves it. I think I'm pulling it up right now. Yes, you have to make a written request to the supervisor, providing the reason, the purpose why it needs to be preserved, and then the supervisor can authorize that to extend beyond the 30 days or 10 days with the amendment. So there has to be a written record of the reason that it's granted, but there are no specific reasons in the bill that would qualify.
Thank you, Director Cooper. And Madam Chair, if I may, with one more question,
yes.
Maybe this may possibly be for Director Cooper as well. Holding that data for 10 or 30 days, can you help to clarify, is this if there was a hit, or is this for anyone? So if me, Councilwoman Porterfield, didn't commit a crime, driving down the street and my information was captured, is my information being held, or is the information being held once there was a hit? If my tag showed up on the hot list or something of that nature, are they then holding the information?
It would hold all information, everyone that passes through for that 10-day period. And then if there was a hit, then that would extend beyond that. But so, that gives a 10-day or 30-day window where if, let's say, a crime was committed a week ago and it was in a certain area, then the police would be able to view the list of license plates that went through that particular area where there was an LPR at the time.
But, and correct me if I'm wrong, they would only be searching for that particular license plate that the crime was associated with the crime. So they would have the data of everyone, but they would only be searching for that particular license plate on the hot list.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Councilman Nash, Chair Nash.
A couple of issues to Councilmember Sepulveda's question. The LPR is kind of, there's two different systems. The in-car system, obviously, if the bell rings on the LPR software, the police officer obviously is right there to address that issue. You are correct. With the polls, there may or may not be a police officer right there at the time. But the value of the polls, I think, has been explained a little bit here, but one of our first meetings where the DA was talking about the homicide that had occurred in Bellevue, and they had kind of a vague description of the car, and they checked with Bellmead cameras to see if a car matching that description went through about the time of the crime, and were actually able to identify the suspect. So it's an investigative tool, and the stationary polls tend to be as much an investigative tool, if not more, than the kind of instant alarm and having a police officer there. And that's what that data for 10 days is for. Detectives 3 days later get information that a car with a certain description, a license plate, was seen at a particular location, and they can go back and look at a camera that might have some access to that location and see if they can find that car. I don't know if that helps clarify your question or not, but I hope so.
Thank you for that clarification. And before we've kind of spent more than our 10 minutes on this particular amendment, and I want to be cognizant of our time. Director Cooper, should we be making I guess a decision or a poll on the amendment, the Stiles Amendment and the Hurt Amendment in regards to the pilot program now to save us some time on the council floor and in the committee meetings, or how should we do that?
The problem is that the public notice that went out for this meeting did not say that there was going to be a vote.
Okay.
So I think even an informal poll would be considered a vote. Okay. Plus, then you would get into making sure you had quorum and all that. So I think the better course of action is to have the discussion here and then just take the vote in the committee meeting.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so we'll take one more question, Councilmember Stiles, and then we'll move on to the next amendment. Councilmember Stiles.
Thank you, Chair. So actually, I wanted to go back and address Councilmember Porterfield's question in regards to the drag racing, because that equipment for using LPRs and radar in conjunction for drag racing is being used right now in Nashville. It's being used at Opry Mills, and they have captured several people as a result of using that. So it exists. It does work. I think that previously there was some confusion because we haven't really used it here in Nashville. So there was a bit of guesswork taking place, but it's being used in Nashville right now by security systems. It's also being used in other cities. So it is viable.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And Chair Nash, if you wouldn't mind taking over the question and answer discussion so that I can talk about my amendment that's up next.
All right, the chair recognizes Chair Gamble.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So this amendment, is sponsored by me and co-sponsored by Councilmember Taylor, speaks to some of the concerns that we've heard during our discussions with the community concerns regarding the use of LPRs. The first is an addition of this number 2, 3, and 4 under section G. Adds to some of the requirements that should be implemented, or some of the safeguards that should be implemented with the LPRs. Number 2 speaks to the deployment of the technology. One thing that we heard is that this technology, if it were used, should be spread out across the city and just not targeted in specific areas. And so this amendment proposes that the placement of the fixed technology fixed on the poles in the public right-of-way shall be limited to major and collector streets as defined by the Nashville Next Major and Collector Street Plan. So that plan will determine what streets would be allowed to be a location for the camera, and that the cameras be distributed equitably across the north, south, east, and west quadrants of the county. So however many cameras we have, we need to make sure that they're distributed equitably across the quadrants of the city as well, and that there's a deployment policy in place, or at least this amendment would provide that policy to make sure that we're placing those cameras in an equitable way. The next measure, and please excuse my Marley, the policy, it should be the verification policy rather, shall be developed by MMPD to help prevent erroneous and potentially dangerous stops based upon incorrect and outdated information. And I think we've talked about that. Some of the other bills and amendments speak to that. That we should require verification of information on the hot list in real time, updating of the hot list so that we're not pulling data from a hot list that is outdated or hasn't been updated, and to keep from having instances where we're pulling the wrong cars over or getting inaccurate information. So that should be updated in real time. And also that information should be transferred daily to the operator officer in the field. So if the operator officer is using that hot list data, then that real-time updates should be transferred to that officer in the field. And the last part of this amendment speaks to a 2-step scanning process to deter the use of LPR systems by MMPD or any other group for purposes other than law enforcement. There was concern expressed in the community about the possible use of this LPRs to target people with protest or vulnerable groups. So this would demand that there be a policy, a 2-step scanning process rather, where the first scan would justify the cause for a search. So if a license plate came up on the hot list, that would be the first scan to make sure first that the license plate number was on the hot list, and that the license plate reader data matches the hot list data. So that is the first scanning process. And then the second scan would justify the action of a search. So after the verification of the hot list data is correct and the verification of the ocular visual license plate image matches the hot list data, then the second scan would allow a deeper dive into the information to retrieve the registered owner's name, address, criminal record, etc. that's needed. And I think that sums it up. So I'll take any questions that you all may have regarding this. I see questions. Councilman Nash, if you want to take over this part.
Sure. I see Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll work backwards. I think that if I'm understanding you have 3 parts to yours, if I'm not mistaken. So the third part, I think that section 1AI and II sort of deals with that because it says law enforcement agencies must have a reasonable suspicion that a criminal offense or a civil traffic or parking offense has occurred before examining collected license plate reader data. So I mean, there has to be something that has happened. They can't just go in, and that's tracked. Why? Who is searching the database? Why are they searching the database? And what are they looking for? Is all documented. So I feel like that's already handled. The other part is, so when you're saying scanning and then doing another scan, the license plate database does not hold any personal data. So there's no delving deeper into the database to get, they have to cross-reference with another database like the DMV or something, but there's literally zero personal information that's inside of the LPR database itself. So if you'll explain that, because I don't want it, to be more confusing than I think it has to be, but and somebody else can speak to that too, maybe Captain Gilder on, what is in the actual database or.
Yeah, well, the intent is not that it's in the LPR database. The intent is that the first scan is of the LPR database. And then the second scan would be the permission to go into the DMV or whatever other database, NCIS or whatever other database to get the personal information. So it's not that it's in the LPR database, but it's allowing that next step to retrieve that information.
Okay.
And Captain Gilder, I guess you can speak to that. And also Director Cooper, if you will speak to if there is any difference in this number 3 as far as the hot list and optical data verification, or actually you were asking about number 3 rather. If the fact of 1A2, I guess it is, that you said is similar to number 4, if they are similar, or if there is some difference to the two of them.
Yeah, I just because in 582 as it's written, it requires a criminal act to have already happened before the database is searched. I feel like that's already happened, instead of searching it and then verifying, yes, something's happened, and then getting, you know what I mean? It's like it's sort of already embedded into it. But
my interpretation is that it's suggestive in the initial view. It's suggestive, whereas this is an actual policy that, yes, this is what we have to do. But that's just my interpretation. But I'll let Ms. Zeitlin and Director Cooper speak to that.
They both do concern the same subject matter. I would have to do a more detailed review to determine if they can both function together, as to whether there's an actual conflict. But yes, they do both address the same subject matter.
Okay.
I don't think they conflict. I just think it might be a little bit redundant, which is, neither here nor there. Let me go, unless somebody else wants to speak to that particular item. I wanted to go up to the first part about equitable placement.
Could I interrupt one moment? Council Lady Hurt has got her hand up, and I know we lost her earlier. Do you mind if she speaks up now, and then we'll get back?
Yeah, go ahead.
Council Lady Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair. I apologize for being absent. I'm actually trying to negotiate 2 meetings right now. And my question is I don't know. I did hear some of the things that Councilmember Stiles had on her amendment, which I really liked in terms of the inclusion of Community Oversight Board and some of those things. What I wanted to do with my amendment was to indicate that we have a pilot program, and if it shows that it's not working, then we end it, as opposed to having a resolution to begin. And I'm not sure how we can have start a program without the resolution. So is it any way that we could, kind of amend the amendments to make sure that we take the good out of some that we have and come up with the very best between all of those that we have?
Yes. I think that's a great point. Director Cooper, and Councilmember Hurt may have missed your comment on that. We kind of talked about where we should go from here, and I think that's appropriate that we make any changes or amendments before the council meeting. But I'll let Director Cooper.
And anything that is written today can be changed before the meeting. So
Okay.
it is possible to change the pilot language to something else between now and then.
Okay, so I'm not sure if how that should be, because all of this other stuff is just, I was trying to follow, and I'm like, I know that I need to give my undivided attention to this and can't negotiate the two meetings that I'm trying to do. But where do I go from here? Do I need to get with Council Member Styles or Councilmember Johnston, since she's the sponsor of it, or what, or should I just talk with you?
Well, you can't do anything outside the open meeting, so we'll just limit it at that.
Well, that's why I was, I guess, saying, should I, talk to Councilmember Styles or Councilmember Johnson now while we are in this meeting?
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So is it some way we can walk away with the compromise with this? Because I did really like quite a few of those things that Councilmember Styles had in her amendment. That my only thing is that I just want to make sure that if we have the resolution, that the resolution should be to stop the program because it's not working, as opposed to showing that it works and then we do a resolution for it to continue.
Councilmember Styles and then Councilmember Johnston.
Perfect. This is exactly what I was hoping we do right now, is to figure out, because we do have this pilot, how does this work? And we seem to be coming at it. We desire to have 6 months so we can really demonstrate that this works, or if it doesn't. But it's the manner of how we continue. So Council Lady Hurt, before Director Cooper had shared, your resolution is to stop it, that it would continue kind of beyond the 6 months. And then there's kind of a point where it just clicks in to automatically being an ordinance, versus mine, which is 6 months after having 3 reports of data to see how this has been effective. And then if we've got the data and we can see that it works, doing the resolution to make it permanent. For me, my sentiment is, I don't want to rely on trying to come back around or assume that council members are going to forget, and then we just automatically put something in as an ordinance. And that's how I feel having the resolution to stop it works. That's my perception. But again, we have an opportunity now for everyone to pitch in and give your thoughts, because however it works out, I think if we can have the conversation now, then this is an amendment that gets fixed before we get to the floor on Tuesday, and we're just voting on it, having had all this input.
That's what I thought. I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay,
we're all too excited.
I know, that's what I actually thought, and I guess I should put my picture up. I thought that that's what my resolution was doing, was stopping it, once we found out that it really was not working. And I guess I thought that your piece about the 6 months was that we started at that particular point with a resolution to say that it is a bona fide program. Because to me, if it's working and it has been working for 6 months, it's already bona fide. Now we just have the evidence and the data to support what we already put in place to work.
Can the chair make a suggestion? I think both of these amendments tend to be friendly amendments. It's just a matter of whether we have a resolution cutting it off or allowing it to go forward. So would it be appropriate for the main sponsor of the bill to maybe kind of weigh in and flip a coin?
Yeah, choose the
Would
next.
that work? But definitely, we need to hear from Councilmember Johnston.
Yes, and Dr. Cooper's got his hand.
Oh, if Director
Councilmember
Cooper
Johnston.
if Director Cooper wants to chime in, I'm happy to let him say something first.
So I have a suggestion just from a mechanics standpoint. The way that the sunset would work in Councilmember Stiles' amendment is I believe it would kick in when the bill passes. So one way to accomplish both what she wants and what Councilmember Hurt wants is maybe to have it kick in the 6-month start when the department implements the program, because it'll take 6 months to procure the cameras. So that would be one way to kind of bring both together, I think.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Council Lady Hertz does specifically say that beginning the first day that the LPR system is operational, because that's when we're actually going to be able to start getting the data. And I don't know, I'm not 100%, but I don't think that Council Lady Stiles addresses an actual specific start date, or maybe you're saying it starts when this ordinance passes.
Well, right now it does, but what I was suggesting is if she wanted to take that part from Councilmember Hurt's amendment, incorporate it into hers, but then it still be a true sunset so that it does end after the 6 months unless the council takes action to extend it.
As sponsor, my preference is Council Lady Hertz pilot. It's definitive on, it's already written out. It's already definitive on when it starts. And it's incumbent upon us to end it, not begin it. Because what I don't want, and I don't think any of us wants this, is that 6 months after the pilot program to start this whole fight all over again. Are we going to continue it? Are we not? And so I think everybody's tired of talking about LPRs. So that's sort of my fear. So I would rather be in a position to say, okay, yeah, we need a resolution to end this because it's not working, versus starting the whole conversation again. Oh, are we going to continue this or not? Oh, let's start it up again. You know what I mean? So I think the path of least resistance for everybody is that if it's not working, fine, let's do a resolution to end it. But I just don't want to start this all over again after the pilot program that will force us to take action to actually continue the program. So that's my preference, but I'm also just one vote, so.
Thank you. We see Councilmember Henderson. Let's get Councilmember Henderson in here, and then we'll go back to making a vote, because I want to make sure we get all of our questions asked as well.
Okay.
Or not a vote, I'm sorry, we're not voting, we're just discussing. Councilmember Henderson.
Chair Gamble. So I have been taking some notes, and so I was actually, my hand was raised similar to kind of the exchange that you all just had with the input from Director Cooper. So I'm kind of looking at like what aspects that, and I commend all my colleagues for, you all have, there's some redundancies, but that's good, right? Because you're picking up on what the community's saying and finding those common things. And I guess I'm just wondering, kind of from a functional standpoint, there are those of us that are, attending and taking notes and trying to kind of keep up with this. And Director Cooper and Ms. Zeitlin, I guess I'm just hopeful from a kind of a larger body standpoint, like people that aren't necessarily in the weeds on all this, LPR stuff, the extent to which you all can kind of facilitate, whether within this meeting or subsequent to it, saying, okay, these are the things that match up. Here are the things that practically, you want to do. And just kind of rendering the advice back to the amendment proposers so that what we get is a larger body. You know, that becomes my concern, and that's been kind of throughout this discussion. This is multifaceted and complex. And so I even, you know, participating and taking my notes and saying, okay, these are how these are similar. You know, was still having some confusion around the most recent point we just discussed between Ms. Stiles and Ms. Hurt's amendment. So Director Cooper, can you speak to whether all this will be kind of worked out within the context of this current meeting, or if there's something that you and Ms. Zeitlin can do subsequent to facilitate all these proposers so that what we get, you know, it's almost like I want a kind of special, like a separate analysis that's just for, here's what the amendments were, here's how they concurred, here's how they whatever, and thus, you know, here is now the package of the 3 amendments, or, you know, the unified amendment that is, you know, sponsored by Ms. Gamble, Ms. Stiles, Ms. Hurt, Ms., you know, all together. Can you just speak to that, Director Cooper, please?
So what we will do is after this meeting, we will talk to each of the sponsors of the amendments and substitutes and talk about where there is consistent consensus and where there's differences, and kind of see what they want to do. And then once we get their amendments in final form, we will write a separate analysis of each amendment and substitute so that you can see, you know, how they are the same and how they are different. You know, obviously, hopefully we can come up with a consensus amendment to offer, but if not, then we'll have an analysis of the various amendments that will be offered.
Thank you.
That would be great. We're coming up, we're on 2 hours now in this meeting, and we were supposed to end at 6:30. So we still have one other substitute, and I don't think Councilman Rosenberg is on the line anymore. I'm not sure if one of the other sponsors want to speak to the substitute just briefly of what it does. It kind of just takes out everything in 582. So I'm not sure that we need an extensive.
Sorry.
Yes.
I just wanted to go back to yours because the first part of it I wanted to speak, and I think that's the biggest part of yours is the placement, the equitable placement of it. Okay. And I just wanted, sorry, because I know it's 7 o'clock or no, it's only 6:30. Anyways, 2 hours. So I'm here's what I'm worried about is that if we demand or we put in the policy an equitable placement, you know, what does equity mean by zip code or by the crime rates in that area? Because I think the unintended consequence is going to be that places like Oak Hill, no offense, Angie, that don't necessarily need as much support because their crime rates aren't as high as, for example, my Paragon Mills area that is begging for it and wants this. You know, if that's how we're defining equity is by the crime rates where it's actually needed, because I don't want this technology to go to waste just based on, you know, some anecdotal, oh, we're being equitable type thing. I really want it to go where it's going to be used and have the most impact for people. So if you can just speak to the intent of it, and then we can figure out, you know, how that's going to work, and maybe Captain Gilder can speak to. I mean, I'm not a police officer. I don't know, you know.
Well, as I said, the intent behind it is that hearing a lot of concern about targeting. I mean, we've had the Driving While Black study. We know that more crime happens in poorer, less educated communities. So I'm not suggesting that we use equity as far as the crime rates, because there are a lot of variables that we can look at to address that. What I'm suggesting is that we look at major and collector streets, because even though the crime doesn't happen in district 32 or whatever, that the person may drive by there, by a collector or major street in that district. So the idea that we need to have it in the areas where there's the most crime is not really valid when when crimes are happening all across the city and people are, a lot of times people come into other neighborhoods to commit crimes that they don't necessarily live in that neighborhood. So we're not suggesting that we should put them in high crime areas. I'm suggesting that we that we disperse them or deploy them equitably across the city on major roads where we have a lot of traffic. We may use traffic studies to determine where we need to put the license plate readers, but not crime analysis or crime rates.
Captain Gilder, can you speak to the language and maybe, what the unintended consequence is? I mean, I just want to make sure that my neighbors are going to be safe and they're put where they need to be. However we want to define it, can you speak to your interpretation of Section 2 of her Council Lady Gamble's amendment, please?
Yes, ma'am. So I believe if I read it correctly, it requires them to be distributed equitably across quadrants, the north, south, east, and west quadrant. So again, I'm not the sponsor. So, I mean, my reading of it is that it would be geographically based. To your point, I think most of the time when we're deploying resources, whether that would be, cameras or officers in cars, we try to deploy where the crimes are. We're very data driven as an agency. So I think our preference would be to deploy them based on crime analysis data. But like I said, my reading of the amendment is that it would be a geographic requirement to keep them distributed across the county.
Could you also speak to if you could use them, if they would be useful as far as geographically and how they're deployed? Would they only be useful using crime rate analysis, or could they be useful using them on major roads where there's high traffic?
Yes, ma'am. No, I think the cameras are useful. Wherever we can deploy them. I think there's an advantage to deploying them closer to where a crime occurs. As if I have a crime happen in a particular neighborhood, the closer the LPR is to that neighborhood, and we know the vehicle description past that camera, the more reasonably certain we are that's our suspect vehicle. But certainly to your point, yes, there are people come and go, and depending on time of day, like the Belmead incident where there was a homicide suspect from Bellevue passed through Belmead, not a particularly high crime area, but given the time of day, they felt pretty certain they had captured that person on their LPR system. So yeah, I'm not discounting that at all. I'm just speaking to our typical practice is we try to focus our resources close to where our crime problems are, where the data indicates where those problems are. So I think there is some advantage to deploying them close to that. But I'm certainly not discounting your point that even though they are on other areas around the county that they're not useful, they certainly would be useful there.
And let me add that the 10 also spoke to the issue that these LPRs are already allowed by private individuals in private neighborhoods. And so the neighborhoods themselves, your Paragon Mills neighborhood maybe could look at cameras specifically to neighborhood streets, whereas Metro is looking more of a collective view of use of the license plate readers and not focusing on particular neighborhoods.
Was that for me? Yeah.
I don't know if it was a question, but yeah, go ahead.
So my Paragon Mills neighborhood, I helped them just start a neighborhood association. And so, I think requiring them to get their own cameras to protect themselves, they don't have the means to do that. And honestly, on the heels of a 34% tax increase, saying, no, you're going to have to pay for your own security device, maybe a little bit of a slap in the face. So, I think I'm not going to fight so hard against, the major and collector streets versus residential streets, because I think my sense is that we're going to have a tremendous success with it. and we could, maybe do something different later on after it's a proven concept and technology. So I'm happy to start with that. I'm just concerned about the language where it says distributed equitably across north, south, east, and west quadrants, just because, maybe a quadrant is not so bad because that's 4 quadrants, I guess. And I think there's areas in each of those quadrants that we could, figure that out on. But again, I just want the communities that need that support and need that help and are the most afraid and are the most victimized, or the ones that can have access to this technology and this level of protection. So that's my only answer.
I might be able to help this conversation a little bit as an old cop and as somebody who spent several years in planning too, and looking at the crime maps and the like. I assure you that in every quadrant of the city, a major thoroughfare runs through crime hotspots. So, and I think, so I don't know that you can't do the same thing. Gallatin Road, Dickerson Pike, Nolensville Road. And you'll catch a lot of the criminals coming out of the neighborhoods because they got to use these main thoroughfares to get where they're going. So I don't know that we need to have too much of an argument over this. And I'm going to say one more thing, now I'll just sign off here. I would hope that some of the sponsors of the amendments and some of the substitute bills will get with Director Cooper, and maybe we can eliminate some of the duplication, if not all. I guess saying something twice isn't bad. And then to see if we can't work out those compromises so that when we have our meeting and really get down to serious vote, we can kind of, as Angie has mentioned, Council Lady Henderson, that we have something that is kind of we've agreed to prior to the meeting. And I'm done.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Nash. We have a couple of hands, and then we'll kind of wrap up here. Council Member Taylor hasn't spoken, so we'll let Council Member Taylor speak. We'll go back to Council Member Hurt. She can finish her thought, and then Council Member Henderson. Council Member Taylor, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. This is Council Member Taylor. When it comes to the equitable distribution, I held a community meeting in regards to license plate readers, and several of the questions that were asked to the panelists and just discussion that we had was, where will they be placed and how will they be equitably placed? And one of the worries were when individuals in communities such as mine that do have high crime rates, they were worried about profiling and targeting. And so assuring that community members all across the city will have the same or similar amounts of camera usage or camera footage in their communities as well, or in their throwaways as well, assures that there is not opportunity for profiling and targeting. And so, here's the thing. Let's talk about 37208. We can't just put 75% of cameras in 37208, right? We can't do that. And so what this amendment is saying is that let's look at a wide scale throughout the entire city so that we equitably have cameras throughout the entire city. So we're not necessarily targeting or profiling 1 or 2 or 3 communities throughout Davidson County. So I think that this is a great addition to, actually I wanted to do this, so we already had it, so I signed on. So it was a great addition to this bill, especially when, we have community members that are trying to build trust, or that we lack trust with Metro Police Department and policing. And I get a chance to serve a community that does have some trust issues there, and we have to work on that, and we are working on that. And I think this is a great start to work on building that trust, to not deploy cameras only in those communities that do see a high rate of crime, that do have a higher rate of poverty, that do have a higher rate of people of color, to distribute them equity throughout the entire city.
Thank you. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think I said Hurt and then Henderson.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Hurt.
Oh, that's okay. I was just was actually responding. There was a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I don't know if it was for me or if it was for the entire group. From Melissa Cherry, she was asking how was this going to be funded, and also she made a comment that she thought that this same could function with cameras as well, just as well as with the LPR. So I think her concern is really about the cost of the LPRs and how we would be able to fund it. And I'm not well versed enough to be able to answer those questions, but wanted to make sure that they were heard.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I did not see that in the chat. And at this point, they would be funded by Metro government, just like the body worn cameras are funded. So it would be, and Director Cooper, you or Mr. Jameson can correct me if I'm wrong, but the funding would come from Metro.
Yes, ma'am. It would likely be 4% funds, which are used for equipment.
Thank you. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to speak in support of your approach to equity being geographic and spatial, and concur with Councilman Nash, because with arterials and collectors, just based on how our road network works, coming out of neighborhoods, you're going to pick that up. But to respond to Council Lady Johnson's concern and kind of intersecting with the fiscal aspect of it. I can hear what you're saying, Council Lady Johnson, because you don't want it to be sort of kind of so dilutive, but that said, I think, Mr. Cooper, I don't know if we have, I understand arterials, collectors, that specific language we have in our code. I don't know if quadrant really, I think we all understand the spirit of quadrant, splitting the county in 4. But I think when we think about cost and, whether these are stationary, they're in car, they're, I do think there is potentially some opportunity to be responsive, like to what Council Lady Johnson is talking about. I think that we already do, kind of like at holiday time, we have the cameras that are on trailers that can be kind of put into a specific situation. So I do think we need to think about it comprehensively, such that, cameras that might be stationary, what is the cost? How will those be very equitably, spatially, geographically, fairly distributed around this whole county? And could we respond to a concern like Council Lady Johnson's or the communities when, there's a hot spot or something, the community is expressing that desire, and then that could be placed on a temporary basis. But I think, we have to be very clear, colleagues, whether it's in the language of this bill or in internal policy, to be able to say to our constituents, because of the profiling concerns, these are why these things were placed in these places, right? And the more simple we can make that, arterial, collector, quadrant, and I'm not saying there's not any nuance around, where are high crime areas, but I just think I would encourage you all to, refine that language, but I personally support the kind of the geographic spatial equity approach to it. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Stiles.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to speak a bit to what Councilwoman Henderson just mentioned. We do have an option as we look at rolling out this equipment of having the stationary poles and also having the trailers, which enables us to be able to move them in a variety of places. So that is the demonstration of equity, right? It's, it's on Gallatin Road, for a week or two, and it moves, and it's on Edmondson Pike for another time. I think that would be very beneficial to this argument and establishing that for the future.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more hands in the queue. Oh, well, I do see Councilmember Nash. Chair Nash, is that an old hand? We can't hear you.
I told Little Phipps that I was done, but I just want to remind everybody too, for the public's, this bill is only an enabling bill for the police department or the health department to implement LPR technology into the business they're doing. It doesn't create a single program. Now, not to be too coy, obviously, the police department's got interest, health department's got interest, so there will be some equipment, whatnot bought. But the police department will have come back to us. Health department already has a contract. They'll have to come back to us for renews. So this is enabling legislation, and the real programs we'll get to revisit again and make sure that I trust the police department will do the right thing going forward, especially with the guidelines that we've got here for them. So I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, if there are no other questions or no one that wish to speak on the substitute, Rosenberg substitute to 582, which basically just takes out everything in 582. I don't know if there, yes. Yes, Councilmember Sepulveda, okay.
I'll let Councilmember O'Connell.
Oh, okay.
One second, Violet. I'm gonna go to this meeting. Right? Can you hang out there for a second? Thanks. Sorry, everybody, coming away from from dinner. So I guess I would characterize it slightly differently from Madam Chair in this regard. So back in 2017, I think council members at that time appropriately sought to prohibit proliferation of a technology that should be viewed judiciously, right? Rather than taking an approach of the entire city might be criminals, therefore we should cast a huge wide net and capture everybody, under every circumstance, and then weed out those who are not criminals. We took a very cautious approach and generally looked at ways to limit the use of the technology for appropriate, very limited targeted uses, such as the dash cam program that is in effect, such as the smart parking program and loading zone program that is in effect. And so the substitute is not just rip out everything that's a part of 582. In fact, it actually allows for some limited uses. It does not allow installation of fixed LPRs, and it adds some limitation on uses, but it does do some things where LPRs are concerned that I think are important. It adds a prohibition on data retention with mobile LPRs. It also requires officers to visually confirm LPR data is accurate prior to initiating a stop instead of just trusting that the data is accurate. And it also requires, it introduces what I think is generally a good trend and requires quarterly reporting to the Metro Council. So the limited uses are really on fixed LPRs, and then the mobile application tends to be limited to a very specific number of uses. But this is still actually an expansion of the use of LPRs beyond what is currently allowed by the Metro Code of Laws. So I hope colleagues will seriously consider this. And again, I would consider most of this discussion to lead us into pilot territory, and ideally that we consider applications on a case-by-case basis rather than the broader application that is, to Councilmember Nash's point, starts to be offered with 582.
Okay, thank you. I see Councilmember Stiles in the queue. Is that an old hand, or do you have a question related to substitute 582?
I am sorry, Madam Chair. My hand is up, but I actually wanted to make a comment before we wrapped up in regards to the pilot.
Okay, do we have any questions about the substitute ordinance to 582 before we wrap up? Ms. Zeitlin or Director Cooper, can you Are there any conflicts or redundancies in this substitute that we need to discuss?
Well, the substitute replaces all of the language in the bill, so everything that was discussed previously would not apply. So while it deals with the same subject matter, it's a different approach. So yeah, it's I don't think there'd be any conflict because it would be its own thing.
Okay.
Yeah, to clarify, Madam Chair, I think from my perspective, colleagues should think of this as deciding between two different approaches, right? One is a more expansive approach to LPR technology. The other is a more limited approach. If we adopt the substitute, it is a sign that council and the community prefer the more limited approach. If we adopt the 582 as originally filed, it's a sign that we prefer a more expansive approach. And I think that's where the discussion is at this point.
Thank you for that clarification. All right, I don't see any hands in the queue. Councilmember Stiles, if you want to make your point, and then we'll wrap up.
So I know that Director Cooper and Ms. Zeitlin are going to be doing kind of a side-by-side analysis for everyone, but were we able to kind of get a consensus in regards to the suggestion that Director Cooper made about taking that initial language from Councilmember Hertz in clearly indicating that this would begin, the 6 months would begin once the equipment had been approved and been placed, and then we would deal with a resolution? I just wanted to see how people felt about that, if we're able to save ourselves some time. Not a vote, but kind of a temperature check.
Director Cooper, I think what he's suggesting is that after this meeting, they'll reach out to all of the sponsors of the bills and amendments and work on clearing up any I guess conflicts or redundancies that way. But we're not able to take a vote or a poll during this meeting. He's nodding his head.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for hanging in here. It's been 2.5 hours. I think we got a lot accomplished, and I so appreciate all of your work and due diligence and attention to this. And I think whatever we come out with will be better for it for all of the due diligence that we put into this. So thank you all. Chair Nash, if you have anything you want to end us off with.
Thank you. Very well run meeting, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.